Welcome back to Between Breaths podcast. Jacko here as your host, and again, a fantastic guest for you today. Leah Ryan is a fellow master instructor with the Oxygen Advantage, but his breadth of athlete that he's worked with across a huge variety of different sports, as well as the breadth of his background as a strength and conditioning coach. He talks about a huge variety of modalities of training. He's training the Wim Hof method, fascial training, the Oxygen Advantage, Buteyko, strength and conditioning. Like it's a full rounded approach or 360 approach to supporting the athlete for their performance. He focuses, he works with general pop as well as athletic performance. But this conversation focuses on drawing out his experience and expertise for decades on utilizing breath for athletic performance. And we talk a lot about some ways in which we can help improve the development and building of that all important aerobic capacity or aerobic base, as well as the techniques and things that he utilizes from an anaerobic perspective. So this is a great episode if you are somebody who likes to take part in any form of physical exercise, and there's some absolute gems in here from Leah to help you improve your performance, your recovery, your breathing. You may even do a few air squats in the sauna after you've listened to this one, but I'll let that spike. Let that spike your interest as we roll into this week's or this episode with Leo Daniel on the Between Breaths podcast.
We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast.
Aha, hold it. You've heard the jingle, but actually, I haven't told you about the 3-week breath hold online course done via Zoom that is going to be available in October. Running it again live via Zoom starting the end of October. There is an early bird offer going to be running through September, but for those that are subscribe to the email newsletter for Pro Breathwork, that's the website and the Pro Breathwork app, you are going to get a very special discount offer at some point in your email box. You need to keep an eye on your emails in August. Now, you're going to need to be quick because there's only going to be 20 of those special discount offers for email newsletter subscribers for probreathwork.com. So if you haven't yet, you need to go over to probreathwork.com and subscribe to the email newsletter. Or if you haven't downloaded the app, or but it's available. The free Foundations of Breathing course is the free course that's on there that covers everything from like assessments, biomechanics, biochemistry, breathing for exercise performance, breathing for better sleep. 7 different modules to work through on that free course that give you all the basics around breathing to help you work on your to create a great foundation for breathing for yourself, for your life, for exercise, for sleep, for everything. That's completely free, totally available. And if you sign up to that, then you can tick the box to get added to the email newsletter as well. The 3-week breath hold course, I ran it for the first time at the beginning of the year. It's sold out. We had some amazing feedback. I personally loved coaching it. I was brought together all the different elements around breath holding that I utilize with professional, international athletes and teams to help improve their performance, their recovery, their mental resilience. So we look at not just the breath holding for like conditioning, we look at it for even things like hypertrophy, as well as what are the things that we do to set ourselves up? What are the things that we do to help us improve our breathing ability? What are the things that we do with our breathing mechanics to ensure that we can deal with the additional challenge or stress of the breath hold itself? And what are the recovery strategies that we develop? as part of it. So it's not just the breath holding piece, that's the middle piece. There's the what we're doing before, and then there's the what we're doing afterwards with the recovery. And all of that is covered over a 3-week course starting at the end of October. It's run live via Zoom, so you can join anywhere in the world. And also, if you can't join the sessions live, the replays, you get lifetime access to the replays of each of those sessions. So keep an eye on your inbox. Sign up to the Pro Breathwork newsletter if you haven't yet. Keep an eye on your inbox for that special offer. There's only 20 of them available, so you need to be quick. And I look forward to seeing you in October for the start of that 3-week breathholding course. Enough of that now. You're going to get into this podcast with Leo Ryan from Innate Strength. Leo, welcome to the Between Breaths podcast.
Thank you, Jacko. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, one of the first rules I was told by my father is never trust a man with 2 first names, Leo Ryan.
Well, I have 3. I have Leo and Daniel and Ryan, so I bypass your dad's rule.
Maybe if it's 3, well, I don't think I've ever come across the triple threat. Maybe that means it's fine. But
triple
anyway,
threat, baby.
Well, no, we know you're a very trusted source of information as a coach. We connected through the Oxford Vantage a couple of years ago for the first time at Patrick's place over in Ireland, where you're obviously based. People will be able to tell from the beautiful Irish dulcet accenty tones coming out of out through the airways. But for those that maybe haven't come across the work that you do, just give us a little bit of background into your coaching, the types of athletes that you work with, and then just we'll take a bit of a deep dive into how you use breathing to help athletes improve their performances.
Beauty. Well, look, the 30-second elevator pitch is this. I cured my asthma when I was about 19 or 20. I met Patrick for the first time back in 2004, when I was in desperate need of it. Trained the Buteyko method and cured my asthma with it, which means no medication and no symptoms. That's a definition of the cure, right?
Right.
So from there, went into personal training and strength and conditioning world, and I've spent the last 20 years in that world, mixing between Gen Pop and athletes as well. In particular, in the last almost the last 10 years. So I went back and did qualifications with Patrick in 2015 in Buteyko, and he launched the Oxygen Vantage program that year, and myself and Gray, I think it was those two, and a few others where I was in his first cohort of instructors there, and then use that as a base for breath training, and kind of then started to integrate all the learnings and education that I'd done over the years with strength and conditioning, have integrated them, went on and trained with Wim as well, Wim Hof, integrated that in, and now I kind of present I call it a holistic or a 360 view on coaching. So some people I work with and I look at the entire spectrum of their coaching program, and I will periodize everything, and for others it's specific to breathing then.
Yeah, nice. And what types of it's quite uncommon to have someone have that widest spectrum in terms of like S&C, then the Oxygen Vantage, and then also like the Wim Hof method, combining the mindset, the ice, and everything, and the hyperventilation, which is sort of can seem a bit contradictory to the OA. And it's like for some people they struggle with how can those two things sit, how can someone coach those two things together? You know, you're not the only coach that does that, but there are people, but there will be maybe that's a good question to start with when someone listens to that and goes, hold on a minute, you can't do hyperventilation and Buteyko at the same. Like, how do those two things stand side by side?
That was my original question. When I went back and did the Buteyko qualifications, there was 2 Dutch ladies on the course, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we do the Wim Hof." I was like, "The what? The Wim Hof?" And this is 2015, so we only started to become known internationally kind of 2014. And I was like, "What is that?" And they were like, "Oh, we breathe big, and then we get in the ice." I was like, "Wow, that is crazy!" And Patrick was like, "No, don't do that, no!" It was like seeing Satan himself rise up from the floor. But no, to genuinely, it was they at least back then very opposites, and that was the perception of it. Was, Wim was coming along saying it's great for depression, great for mental health, and a whole host of inflammatory diseases. And then Buteyko had his take that it was great for DaCosta syndrome and over 150 diseases on his side of things.
Yeah.
And just the way my brain had been, because I've been exposed to gurus in the fitness industry before, I've been exposed to different methodologies, and I was reluctant to dive into some of them. But by this stage, I realized there's common good in everything, and there's a middle ground almost everywhere, but I didn't understand it. And so that's why I went training with Wim originally.
Yeah.
And I was always seeking to see where do they both relate. And I suppose my mindset now is it all operates on a continuum, of techniques themselves. And then it depends on where you are on your own continuum.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is you got highly arousing or energizing techniques, a la Wim or holotropic breathing or rebirthing. And then you got highly, I'll call them relaxing, but you can call them parasympathetic dominant techniques, which would be more like free diving, Buteyko, style of things. And then every other technique kind of fits into that continuum somewhere along the line. And depending on, a number of factors like how long you do it, how big and fast your breathing is, or how slow and steady your breathing is, they balance each other out. They all fit on that continuum though.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then what a lot of people don't realize is that's one continuum, that's one idea, which is the techniques. Then those techniques have to be applied to you. And then the question is well, where are you lying? Are you somebody who's on the go the whole time and hyperactive? Are you somebody that's been through deep trauma in your life? Are you somebody that is been doing work for 10 years and pretty balanced in both in your physiology and in your mentality and in your spirit? And so I look at that as a continuum as well. And then when I'm coaching people, I'm looking to layer one on top of the other to choose the appropriate technique. Yeah. When I'm trying to restore people's breathing and start them from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's specifically with the athlete population you've worked with. Just give us a little flavour of like the different sports that you've worked in, or athletes you've supported have been involved in. So it's quite a wide range, right?
Yeah, over here in Ireland we've got a sport called Gaelic Games, so hurling and Gaelic football. Which, by the way, the hurling was on BBC. The All Ireland final. You should check it out on YouTube. It is the most savage game on planet Earth. It is deadly, and these guys are just so skillful at it. But so Gaelic Games will be my original background, and then I went into judo about 15 years ago or so. I've been doing that for 15 years. They're my own personal sports. But what have I gone into? Rugby sevens. Endurance running, ultra endurance running, ultra endurance biking, ultra endurance swimming, judo, MMA, boxing, middle distance running, a sprinter, soccer. So huge, huge variety of sports and reasons why people come to me. Usually the way I look at it is I have a population that is in pain and just want to get healthy. And then I have a population who are either performance or adventure driven. And that's your sports and adventure people. And they're looking to do really cool stuff, whether it's climb Everest or swim the channel or, be a pro sports person. And then, so they both work differently with the breath. But that's a fair idea of who I work with.
Yeah, nice. And do you find that, because a number of those sports you mentioned weren't just endurance sports, they involved the word ultra before. Do you find that does the breathing techniques lend itself more to endurance sports, or do you find it's applicable across the spectrum?
Depends what skills you have as a coach and what way you're going to apply it. So I have a thought that humans are weaker than ever because of the way society is set up. And that's okay. And it is what it is. As in, we're generally less time in nature. less time exercising, poor food quality, poor air quality, poor movement patterns. All of that is, even relationships are affected.
Yeah.
In general, it's just a physically weaker society. And so a lot of people's breathing has adapted to those stressors. And so their breathing system tends to be weaker. So when I'm working with people, the first thing is to get it up to what I consider baselines. So I'm rebuilding their system. And then the performance element is kind of like the cherry on top. It's the last 5 or 10% to any performance program. That's all it is a sports, which is applying it to your sport. So for example, a power athlete, like in the gym, like a power lifter, would need to use their breath to not breathe, to brace, and to protect their spine. A judoka needs to learn how to use their breath for strength and use it to manage energy levels and use it to defeat their opposition, which I love.
Yeah.
Whereas an endurance athlete then, or a field athlete, needs to understand how to breathe, and the most important aspect for them is in recovery, in their intervals. So you got a soccer player who sprints, then it's about recovery, then sprint and recovery, sprint and recovery. That's where a lot of the performance gains comes from them. And then you have the ultra endurance, which it's about their anaerobic threshold and building a huge aerobic base and breathing, obviously aerobic and breathing goes very hand in hand.
Yeah. Well,
so it depends what way you look at it, what way you apply the principles to it.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I love about the Oxford Advantage itself, and also just conversations with great coaches, is that it's about that application of principles. If we understand the principles, we can apply it in lots of different ways. And those examples you've given there, like the two ends of the spectrum, like the power lifter compared to the ultra endurance athlete, it's very different, and what you're going to do with them might be quite different. But there'll be certain things that are similar, but you as the coach can coach both those two people if you understand those principles.
Absolutely, and breathing applies to all of them, because it's a human trait as opposed to a sports trait.
Yeah.
It's a human quality as opposed to just a physical quality in sport.
Yeah, for sure. So I would love to push into your expertise and knowledge around, well, those two, look at those two components you mentioned. They're like building a massive aerobic base for a more of a long distance sort of athlete, or but any athlete benefits from having a good solid aerobic base, and then also the other side of it, the anaerobic work. So we'd like push into those two areas, and start with the aerobic base. From a breathing perspective, what are the most important things that you see that someone needs to be utilizing or integrating into their training? And is there something in their training that they maybe haven't considered, or they're doing too much of, or too little of, or too fat, like when they're trying to work on that aerobic base?
Yeah, essentially, when you're we're gonna, let's simplify. Let's say ultra running, just to give us a something to latch on to that people understand, because I know that's a lot of your own background too.
Yeah.
So people talk about building an aerobic base, but essentially they're doing an integrated practice to do it. Running is an integrated practice. There's the biomotion of the human body. In other words, there's your running mechanics goes into it. There is your heart and lungs go into it. And there is your muscle tissues, and then there is the mindset thing. So that's an integrated practice. But what a lot of people, the only way that they will develop it is to run, and either run slower for longer, or run sprint intervals, or run hills, and it's all focused on running. And the main issue that I have with that is that, one, you're not going to build everything, and I'll go into that now. And two is you're going to end up destroying your joints because you've just done. It's like you've too much of a good thing is bad for you. So you've taken one element of the practice and you've just smashed that because culturally that's what's done, or that's what you know, and that's the only thing you've looked at. So I like to build the human body with a bit of a broader base. And I go, well, what actually goes into running an ultra? What are the elements that go into it? So you go, okay, well, I actually bring it back to cellular health. And I go, well, what goes on in the cell of a muscle? And then how can I break that down? So essentially you have oxygen and food and water goes into the cell to make energy. Then the cell makes energy. And what comes out then is water, hydrogen ion, which I won't focus too much on here, but water, hydrogen, you got carbon dioxide, lactate, and heat. And they're the elements that come out. So a lot of people traditionally go, well, we know lactate. Well, we know how to train the lactate system. That's your repeat sprints. So we'll do that. And we know that that's anaerobic. So then the opposite of that is aerobic. So we'll also know we'll run sprint intervals or hill training, and then we'll do long, slow distance stuff. And that's the evolution of running training, really.
Yeah.
But I look at the cell and I go, hold on a second. What about training CO2 specifically? What about training heat specifically? And when you go into training those two elements specifically, CO2 tolerance or breath resilience, as I call it, and then heat resilience as well, all of a sudden you're building these elements of cellular health. And when you isolate them and strengthen them, and then you bring it back into the running and time it right, you can see huge differences in performance. I've seen an ultra runner he ran it in Mexico. So that's in heat, at altitude, at 100 miles, and he knocked 3 hours off his time.
Wow.
And he thought he had another hour and a half he could knock off because he got his strategy wrong.
How long did that...
This guy is a high performance ultra. Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know his overall. I'll be honest with you. I don't know it overall. That wasn't even his main event. His main event was he wanted to climb Everest. He's a mountaineer, with no oxygen. Yeah. John McManus is his name, and he took on Everest. Unfortunately, Everest just fell asunder for him the way permits worked, and he never got his crack of the whip. But that's his plan. His big dream is to climb Everest with no oxygen. So that's one side. I do have data on guys with VO2 maxes where they've improved. You're looking at 5 to 7% on a VO2 max as a whole through breath training. And more importantly is they built a much stronger aerobic base and pushed out from, I don't know if you guys know this, but you're pushing out from like a high 60s, about a 66 up to an 82% of his VO2 is where he started hitting his threshold. So that's really important for an endurance runner, is to build a massive aerobic base.
Yeah. And so what, that threshold being the...
So that's your anaerobic threshold.
Yeah, anaerobic threshold, yeah. Okay, so nudging that percentage from 60 something into 80.
Huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. That's where the money of VO2 testing comes in and of training comes in for endurance athletes, is building a massive aerobic base. And typically how people do it is the Maffetone method, which came about late 90s, early 2000s, and he popularized the idea of zone 2 training, which has been repopularized again. And the whole point of zone 2 training is to run slowly. So it gives so you're always with oxygen, and you give your body a huge amount of time to adapt to using that oxygen. But I just take it a step further and go, okay, well, let's make the oxygen delivery pathways that much better through breath training.
So you mentioned there like CO2 tolerance and thermal. How do you train those two things? Well, you said heat. Yeah. How do you train? Right. How are you training those two things?
That's the secret sauce. That's the secret sauce. No, it's very like I use saunas. Saunas are the easiest way to train thermal. You can do a variety, and then
you train in the sauna, or just be in? Do you actually train in it, or are you talking about just being in a sauna?
Depends on the person. So where would I start? Just being in it. Absolutely, and building up your time with nasal breathing in a sauna, and then for guys who are conditioned more to my style of training, when they're probably about a year and a half in or 2 years in, then I'm like, okay, it's time to, now you're looking for the extra percentage points. And I'm like, okay, now we're going to take it to another level.
Right. So I'd seen Laird Hamilton like take his assault bike into the sauna, and then it was like one thing that was funny was that how hot the handles got, so he had to have like cooking like mittens, like oven gloves.
So Laird is probably I would think, certainly from my knowledge, he is the first guy to do all this stuff where you bring in sauna work.
Yeah.
So to give you a little bit of perspective or a little bit of interest in history is when I started looking at this stuff, when I trained with Wim and I was figuring all this stuff out, I was connected through a magazine with a guy called Brian McKenzie, who's really well known in the industry. And Brian your man connected us together because he thought, oh, you'll have an interesting conversation. And Brian was coming at this from a yoga background, and he was one of the first guys to bring Wim over to the States.
Right.
So, and then he's really good. Brian is really good friends with Laird Hamilton.
Yeah.
And that's where that connection with XVT came from. And we got chatting, and I basically told him all things about the Buteyko method and about the oxygen advantage and nasal breathing and the power of it and how to train and how to build it. And then he took it and became his own artist of it and developed it. And himself and Rob Wilson, who was a partner of his at the time.
Yeah.
Then later on, I connected Patrick in, and Patrick became he actually became on the back room, on
like
the
a
board.
consultant.
He became a consultant for Laird and went over and became a consultant for Laird and XVT.
Yeah.
So in terms of strength and conditioning, it was interesting earlier on. You're like, not many coaches are doing it. I reckon myself and Brian were we were the first ones to go from that background and go, this is how we're experimenting with it. And we were talking in experimentation stages. This is how we're experimenting with it. I decided at the time I would run the Dublin Marathon. I'd never ran a marathon, and I'd run that. And I did that pretty uniquely. And I VO2 tested around that. And that showed me the power of breathing for endurance, which was incredible. Similarly, Brian was testing. He got the Pinoy the portable one, and he started testing. And we were both chatting back and forth, and we came to very, very similar conclusions. And he came out then with his breathing gear system, and I came out with breathing level system, which is almost identical, which is now what people know as, you go, level 1 is all nasal, level 2 is in through the nose, out of the mouth, and level 3 is all mouth. And that these vents relate across to your energy systems and how you're using them practically, particularly in endurance sports.
Yeah.
And that all came off the back of the VO2 testing that I did, and similarly that he did over in the States.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating, I thought.
Yeah. And is so are those levels like when you're switching from aerobic to anaerobic, and then when you're reaching anaerobic threshold, are they the points when people are typically changing through either nasal or mouth breathing? Is that?
So yes, in a nutshell, yeah. So when I tested originally, and you got to remember I'm a trained person. So when I did the Dublin Marathon, I had zero running training. I refused to run train. I hadn't ran for more than 100 meters, like more than running for a bus in 7 years. And judo was my sport, but no running training. I did some gym work to look after my joints. I did do one running technique course to make sure I could run and not break myself in two. And that was it. So it was all on the back of breath training.
And this is for the Dublin Marathon or a double marathon?
No, the Dublin. Yeah.
I was like, he's saying you ran a double marathon, meaning like...
No, Dublin in Ireland, the location.
Yeah.
So, because remember, there was no information out here. There's no sports science. Really, Warren's had a couple of papers, but there was nothing that was of any substantial value. So nobody didn't know anything. So I said, right, I'm going to test this.
Yeah.
So I found a guy in Ireland that does private VO2 testing. And I did the VO2 test. And for people that don't know what a VO2 test is, you're on a treadmill, they put a heart rate monitor on you, and they put a gas mask, or they put a mask on you. And the mask tracks changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the heart rate monitor tracks your heart rate.
Yeah.
And the test is a progressive test where it starts at a walking pace, builds you through jogging into running, and it either makes it go faster you know, every gradient, or it makes a gradient go up until you reach failure, until you almost fall off the treadmill. And what it does then is it gets your numbers on how you use your energy, how you use oxygen, how you produce carbon dioxide, and how well your heart is working throughout all of this run. So the one thing I did different was, as I said to Sean at the time, I says, look, I'm going to give you a thumbs up every so often in the test. Just mark off that thumbs up, will you please? And he says, yeah, no problem. So ran the test, and he goes, are you serious? You haven't ran in 7 years? I was like, nope, haven't ran an ounce. He was like, okay. He says, well, you got I think it was a 52.1, which is considered elite for a VO2 test. So 45 is a threshold for elite. Now, it's nothing compared to, like, if you're going to go to like professional standard endurance sports, but it was a really, really high level. He was like, I can't believe this. He says, I also can't believe the numbers when you break it down. And at the time, I think I had like, I think it was about 72% of an anaerobic threshold. So what that means is your anaerobic threshold is a point where you can't use oxygen as easily to provide energy or to produce energy, and you start to reutilize lactate as a fuel source. Yeah. So it's not that you're no oxygen, but it's that it's very difficult to use it and it's less oxygen. So you've hit your peak of oxygen consumption. So he was like, wow, you're using 7% oxygen at your peak. He was like, that's huge. He goes, I only see that in my professional athletes. And he says, come here, what was that? Or I asked him, I says, when I told you to mark the box, I says, where was it? And he says, and he looked at it, he says, oh, that's interesting. He says, within 10 seconds of you hitting that threshold, you gave me the X. And what that X meant was it was a shift from all nasal breathing to breathing in through my nose and out of my mouth. So I was like, wow. I was like, okay, now I know how I can run this marathon. Because remember, I had no heart rates to go off. I had no timings to go off. I had no way of gauging my progress. But now I knew if I was running with all oxygen, that I could definitely get to the end. Yeah. Without. So I knew how to pitch this. So I ended up running the marathon, finished it, and time was brutal. Like, it was just a matter of completing it. Finished the marathon, ran it all nasal because of that. So I taped my mouth back then. That was 2017, and ran it mouth tape, which, by the way, I think is stupid for any mad athlete. I know it's great marketing and PR stuff and that, but like, for me, it will be stupid because my anatomy is poor. If anybody on video will see it, I've got really narrow jaw lines. I've got really small nasal passages. Yeah. And that's with all my training and practice. It's just for me to use my whole energy system and to max out, I need to shift to mouth breathing at some stage. Even though some research says, well, it's possible to run a VO2 full tilt with only nasal breathing, that's dependent on your anatomy. Yeah. Well, what I did then was I was training a football team, a Gaelic football team, and I've been training them 2 years. So I actually paid for 10 of them to do their tests as well. And they all did their VO2 tests, and they hit their threshold at the same time as I did within 10 seconds of switching from all nasal to nose mouth. And I went, wow. Now, I didn't find a correlation between switching in through the nose and out of the mouth to all mouth. And so that's why I know that's kind of, it's always the last 5-10 seconds of it. But that's why I just don't make a connection between all mouth breathing and, energy systems in the body or whatever. And the big point or the big threshold area is switching from all nasal to going in through the nose and out of the mouth.
Right. Yeah, nice. I love how you take something quite measured and scientific, but then going like, well, the practical application of this then becomes super simple. It's almost like hit you in the face. It was like dead obvious to you, as long as you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I just backtrack one moment to something like talking about training in a sauna. As in, what would that session look like? What type of thing are you doing?
You're not interested in training in a sauna by chance, are you?
No, I just think
I
anyone
can see,
listen,
I can see that brain going.
anyone listening to this, I'm sure, is going like, hold on a minute, you said train in a sauna. Like, what the hell are we doing in a sauna? Because you said, starting point is just be in it and get used to the being hot and get used to the heat. But then somebody, depending on them and their sport and their goals, etc., would potentially actually train in it.
Yep, absolutely.
And what
So,
type of thing is, and how do you check that's safe?
well, what's safety?
I
I mean, you could apply that to anything. What is it? What is the risk of it? I suppose that's what you're asking is, what is the risk of it? I mean, the risk is obviously fatiguing yourself in your body, your core temperature rising high and uncontrollably high that you can't cope with the heat, and then staying in there and keep going. Yeah, so there's always nut jobs out there that are willing to do that, but so my cap on it is you've whatever you're doing, whatever movement pattern you're doing, whether it's holding a plank, which sometimes I get people to do, to air squatting, which is a simple full body movement, to then building up to more event specific stuff if you want. And my cap on it, because I'm just looking to build that I'm not looking to build anaerobic capacity when I'm in the sauna.
My next question is it aerobic?
I'm looking to build aerobic capacity through this. So what my cap on it is all nasal breathing. So I know that at least as a safety mechanism, that if they need to mouth breathe, you're done, you're cooked.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the time somebody gets to doing this with me, is like they're highly trained. They're very self-aware people. They're very self-aware of their energy systems, of how their body works. They've already adapted to the heat and sitting down. They've already adapted to nasal breathing. They've already adapted to foundation lactate training and running training. And now this is just the next layer.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then is there anything specific on the breathing? Obviously you've talked here about like the notion of maintaining nasal breathing is going to keep you underneath that threshold so that you're utilizing oxygen most efficiently. Is there anything else specific that someone would be doing if you were trying to get them to work on that aerobic base to maximize that?
So what are the things that I have them do? Well, I just look for them to put in some good nutrition protocols and look at that. From a training, they'd want to be developed in zone 2 training as well. Which, by the way, is where a VO2 test comes in. So all that beautiful tech that people have, it's all inaccurate. I'd be safe to and happy to say it's all inaccurate. So, like, for example, when I ran the VO2 test, my maximum heart rate, according to their algorithms, should have been 186 beats a minute. Whereas in my own test, I hit 204 beats. So technically, my heart should have exploded and I should have died on the treadmill. But I didn't. So this is where the value. And by the way, over here, like it was 70 euros to do, and you can get it on health insurance. So I don't know what providers are in the UK, but it's not expensive to do. And when I say a serious athlete, like I'm not talking about a pro, but if you're a serious person that's doing ultra endurance stuff and wanting to beat times and really wants to have a knowledge about this, it's well worth doing. Because now it's individualized. Now all your training gets individualized. You have an accurate. I've seen people out by 1.5 zones on their tech algorithms versus what their real algorithms are.
Yeah, okay.
So you think you're in zone 2, and really you could be really in zone 1, which is terrible because you may as well just sit on the couch and do nothing. And that's how good it is for you, or vice versa. And typically they're at the high end of zone 3, touching on zone 4, which means they're going to be overloading their system and running the risk of repetitive use injuries for not much benefit.
Yeah.
So testing is really, really important. I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
if you're a serious athlete.
yeah. No, very interesting. Right.
For me, I like a lot of my guys. I don't test so much. What I rather do is go, look, the proof is in the, like, if you learn how to use your own body, ignore all tests, ignore all data, ignore all watches, get rid of the whole lot of it. I hate all of them. I don't have an aura I don't have an aura ring or a whoop or nothing. I mean, this watch is 20 years old nearly. It's
Yeah,
18 years old. All it
yeah.
has is a repeat timer on it and a clock on it because and a countdown timer. That's
Casio
it.
Illuminator.
Yeah, that's
Classic.
it. And I love it. I love it. And that's all
Yeah,
I use. So your real tech is what's inside you, and it's always far more accurate than anything I've seen. Maybe AI will change that, but it's far more accurate than
yeah.
anything I've seen. And I've tested them all.
With so you mentioned like there was two things for the aerobic base. You mentioned about like the thermal stuff, which we're doing some air squats in the sauna potentially, but nasal breathing to ensure that we're not going to, and then CO2 tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Is the nasal breathing work doing that, or are you adding like breath holding into some of that work?
Yeah, no. So okay, again, even before I get to all of this, it's how do I restore breathing? So nasal breathing all through the day, all through the night, and all through low to moderate level exercise is my motto. So that's where nasal breathing really comes in. So I want you to be able to do nasal breathing at least up the threshold minimum. Um, to deliver that is a structured program to get you there. So this is where you're using the oxygen advantage, and I use other stuff as well to build that up. So yes, breath holding is a key part of it, and so is breath calming. As we know in the
Yeah,
oxygen advantage, it's reduced breathing by relaxation, or sorry, breathe light to breathe right. Buteyko, it's reduced breathing by relaxation, right? It's the
yeah,
same technique.
yeah,
That for me is like the king and queen of all breathing techniques are breathe light to breathe right, and a walking breath hold with recovery. And structuring those two techniques and using the principles of fitness will deliver you nasal breathing through exercise and will deliver you the foundations of breathing. And then if you want to build on that, then you can start bringing in, running breath holds and
yeah,
sports masks and all the cool gadgets that we like to add in.
yeah. Is there how much emphasis do you play on or place on the mechanical aspect of breathing? Because when we're talking about here, talking about nasal breathing, like where does the yeah from your perspective, how important that's like been front and center of the conversation, but beneath that, like what's going on at the diaphragm, what's going on at the rib cage, like how important is that, and is that something that you're uh, I'm gonna say like for me, it's almost like a non-negotiable that you need to be using your diaphragm, regardless of whether you're using your nose or your mouth. I'm just interested in what you think of that.
Okay, so for me, diaphragmatic breathing happens automatically when you have two things in place. One, nasal breathing, and two, you have access to all of the tissues of your body. In other words, you're supple.
Yeah,
When the diaphragm isn't supple, when the intercostals aren't supple, when you've got adapted body positions, that's when you can nasal breathe and not use your diaphragm. And so I used to, when I first started teaching Buteyko oxygen advantage, like that's all I had. I had a hammer, everything was a nail. So that they were the only techniques I used. But very early on, because I have a background, I'm a Pilates teacher as well. I have a background in fascial stretch therapy. I have a
yeah,
background in now sports massage therapy and neuromuscular therapy. So I have these other perspectives on it.
yeah,
And what I realized when I started in the early days, it was taking me 6 months, up to 6 months to get people to get their bolt score above 40. And that would be typical. Whereas I have seen a jump and bolt score of more than 15 seconds in one session once you restore the appropriate motions to the rib cage
yeah,
and to the body. So for me, in my system that I use, if it was to take it from a systematic instead of an individual perspective, it's restoring biomechanics first, restoring biomotion first. Then it's breath resilience, which is about your breath holding and your breath calming techniques. And then it's rhythmical breathing patterns, which is the likes of your Wim Hof breathing and that sort of things.
Yeah.
And that's the process that I take that I found most effective if I was to lay out a pathway.
Yeah.
And doing it any other way is just slower. Unless it, like I've done everything from even putting kettlebells on people and dumbbells on people, and they were a lot less efficient the way I do it now, which is just go to the tissues and restore the suppleness in the tissues. So yeah, I love it. That aspect is really important.
Yeah, no, it's nice that it's something I'll often say to people when we're working on it. It's going, I'm not trying to, when we're trying to restore good breathing mechanics and restore good breathing in general, we're not trying to teach your body to do something that's like alien for it to do. You're just actually trying to set it up, and it will do it well if it's set up correctly. Yeah.
It should do it itself, and you shouldn't have to think about your breathing and performance. You shouldn't have to think about it necessarily in a run. You shouldn't have to think, like, this should all be like background work done in advance, and you're just going out to run your heart out, and your body will then move the way it was naturally built to move and the way you have trained it to move. And those kind of, that awareness will just sink in automatically. And not only will it sink into yourself, it will sink in if you're in an opponent-based sport. You'll start sinking into their breathing patterns, and that awareness comes in where you start kicking their ass because you start playing with their energy levels, and they don't even know what you're doing.
No, I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the psychology of breathing. Like, you're right. The psychology of breathing isn't restricted to you. If your opponent, whether they know anything about breathing or not, they're intuitively reading your breathing body language.
Reading your breathing.
Yeah.
Like I learned it in judo. I've trained with a couple of people that have been at world level, been to world games, been to Olympic games.
Yeah.
And in judo, it's throwing is the main part of it, and then there's hold downs. Like jiu-jitsu, there's hold downs and there's arm locks and there's strangles. But getting your grips on somebody, getting a feel for someone is the first point of contact and the most important. It took me months to understand these guys because they were just grabbing me and throwing me, and I was like, "What the hell?" I was like a 6-year-old kid. I was just been ragdolled all over the place. No, I'm still getting thrown all over the place, but not quite as bad. But when they grip you, they could sense, and I realized this after a while, they could sense when they like pull you forward, your instinct then is to brace and go backwards. They know you're going to do that, but they can do this with like with a twitch of their hand. Yeah. In fact, a feint of their hand, and they can tell what you're going to do in like 8 moves time.
Yeah.
And that really frustrated me, so I got better at it. But my skill in judo is such, and what I then impart to sports people is well, I have that from a breathing point of view, from an energy management point of view. So I know where my energy is at any given time. Yeah. And I know I can make it look different. I can fake it. I can cover it up. I can make myself look far worse than I actually am, or far better than I actually am. All in a bid to put them off their game so that they will either expend more energy, or I can drain the tank on them so then I can just finish them off. And I'm not a nice person when I'm on the mat.
Yeah. I think I might try and be a little bit more purposeful with it. I think I intuitively sort of do that a little bit with running, where, you know, if you're in a race with, or you're in an event with someone, and we hit a climb in the mountains or whatever, and you're like wanting to show that no, this is fine for me. It's like you control your breathing, like you have. I mean, I'd be trying to control like the rate and stuff to help with it anyway. But there's some signaling and some messaging going on, and almost you've thrown up some ideas around psychology to mess with people's heads a little bit.
And I mean, the most famous athlete doing that was Emil Zatopek. There's a little video of him on YouTube, and he was really famous as a runner, known as the Czech locomotive back in the 50s.
Right.
So he won the Olympic Games of 5 and 10,000 meters. He did the double, which was incredible at the time, and then decided I'm going to enter the marathon because he could back in those days.
Oh.
So then he enters a marathon, never ran a marathon in his life. And there was a British guy called Peters, was his surname, and he was the favorite to win, right? I think Brian Peters was his first name. And so Peters set out, and Emil is set out with him, and they're running through it. And he has videos of him, and he's there running with them, and he's like, oh, Brian, you're running so fast. Like, is this the usual pace you run at? And Brian is like, yeah, it is. And so Brian steps on the mark, and the story goes that he steps on the pace and ups the pace. And Emil is staying with him, and he's like, oh my God, this is so hard. I can't do this. And Peter's like, he's like, this is easy. And he pushes on again. Well, Peters ends up bonking and falls out of the race. And Emil shuts his mouth and shoots off and ends up winning the marathon. He won the triple, 5, 10, and marathon in the one Olympic Games. And he pioneered hypoventilation training. He was the earliest guy that I'm aware of that was doing breath holds and repeat sprint breath holds for his training. He used to do it in
hypoventilation, yeah.
Hypo. So in other words, he was doing breath holding for his training. And he was also one of the earliest pioneers, if not the main guy, for interval training, traditional interval training that we know of as well. So yeah, we're only catching up with what's already been known.
Yeah. Final piece then, just switch from aerobic before we finish aerobic to anaerobic. What's the, you said you started off with talking about, like, you look at like what's going on in the cell. Do things then change when it's anaerobic? Does that change then how you're going to go about utilizing the breathing protocols, or how's that
Absolutely.
work?
So think of it like now so if I wanted to build the anaerobic capacity of somebody, what I'm then going to do is, I mean, the tradition is interval training, but now I'm not going to put the limit of in and out through the nose. Now I'm going to say, actually, this is about intensity. So really, you should be at minimum in through the nose and out of the mouth, because that's how hard you're physically pushing. And that should happen very, 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 very early on. So I train the anaerobic capacity like a sprinter, even for an ultra endurance runner. I'll train them like a sprinter. Whereas a lot of endurance and ultra endurance people will tend to go and train their anaerobic system towards the end of their long runs, because they're like, well, I just have to get my runs in and then I'll do it this way. I'm like, no. For me, anaerobic training should be based, if you want to keep efficiency in the system, that's your session that you're running. So you put it right at the very front end of the session and you annihilate that one down to the end of the. And then what I'll finish on is maybe some sprint breath holds at the end of that, just to flog that system completely.
So you do a traditional interval session, and then you do your breath holding at the end of that.
Correct. Correct. And I'm using breathing as a recovery strategy to get them back on points, and then I can flog them again and again and again. And then once that's done, I'll go to the breath holding.
So you like the notion of not doing it at the end of a session for an ultra runner, because at that point you've done a long run already, you're actually tired, and then your 90% effort, or your 95 or your 100%, your effort that you think you're doing isn't actually what your output truly is. And then you're using recovery breathing strategies in between, so that then you can actually go again hard, so that you're getting that top end sort of effort work done.
Yeah, I want to cut the overall training time down and create huge efficiency in the body by using these different strategies, and then build the volume back up again over time. But there'll be a much more competent athlete, much more rounded athlete.
Is there anything specific breathing wise that you're doing? You mentioned about breathing strategies to help them recover in between those intervals, which are presumably relatively short rest periods.
No, the longer rest periods
between you.
So for the anaerobic, for true anaerobic training, you need longer rest periods and shorter.
Right.
So shorter
So
rest
in
periods
order
is
that
for
you can then
aerobic.
go again.
Yeah, and this is something that even a lot of footballers don't get, a lot of sports people don't get is, they'll do, let's say, an 80-meter sprint, and then they'll jog back to the start of the line, and then they'll go again. But the rest period is completely insufficient for what they're trying to achieve. And I'll give you another example, is the famous Tabata protocol, which is actually primarily a aerobic system protocol. Because I know you're doing 20 seconds, you only have 10 seconds rest. So you can only reproduce that power, for maybe 3 or 4 reps. After that, you're not producing anaerobically, you're producing aerobically. So it inverts. Yeah. So I picked longer rest periods. Okay. Long, but not too long, if it's finding that balance in it.
Yeah. And so what would you be, and what would the messaging be in terms of breathing to aid their recovery?
Well, by the end of your run, it's breathe through any hole. Just breathe, right? And what I like to do is to come to the intensity of the body. So I'll say breathe. Think of it this way: go to level 3 first, and then you're going to step down from level 3, which is all mouth, to in through the nose, out of the mouth, to in and out of the nose. And I'm using mechanical positions to aid that as well.
Yeah. So put the body in a position to allow
to enable itself to recover fast, as opposed to force recovery. Because I find when people force recovery on it, that it ends up rebounding and not doing what you want it to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
Beauty.
Yeah. No, I hope that people will be able to take away some of your insights and some of your experience and go, okay, actually there's going to be at least one thing where you go, oh yeah, I already do X, and actually from what Leo said, I'm going to just do it this way around, or tweak this, or I'm going to add this little thing in, or I'm going to go and maybe do a bit of their own research and explore. Maybe it's triggered some questions. Maybe they're going to find somewhere that they can do a VO2 max test for themselves. If they wanted to find out a little bit more about you, or maybe even working with you if they're in Ireland, or if you do work online, you've got your book, like how can people find out more about?
I'm on the gram, baby. I'm on the gram. At Innate Strength is my Instagram, and my website is innate-strength.com. I wrote a book. The book came out last year, and that details not only like what we talked about is how life interacts with breathing. Then the part 2 then interacts with specific health conditions. And then part 3 is a training program. I do touch on the sports stuff, and you'll see some of those stories in there. But I focus the book mainly on the health, which I think is about 90% of the benefits of breath training anyway. Yeah. But yeah, it's called Breathe Free. So you'll get that on the site.
Breathe Free. Great. We'll put links in the show notes to the website and to your Instagram, so people can just click right through from the show notes and give Leo Daniel Ryan
you got
follow if you dare trust him.
Yeah. Thanks, Jacko. Thanks for having me on. Love the conversation, man.
No, thank you so much for your time, mate, and we'll speak soon.
My pleasure. Chat soon, man.
Cheers, man.